All right, this is going to be Chapter 10, the Endocrine System, and this is going to be Part 1. Topics here, we're going to talk about a quick introduction and an overview of the endocrine system. We're going to talk about the pituitary gland, the thyroid gland, parathyroids, adrenaline, pineal, pancreas, endocrine tissues and other organ systems, patterns of hormonal interaction, and integration with other systems at the end of it. 1.0, an overview of the endocrine system, the structures of hormones, mechanism of hormonal control, the secretion and distribution of hormones, endocrine emergencies, and the control of endocrine activity. All right, so cellular communication over great distances is coordinated by the nervous and endocrine systems. I'm going to read this here really quick and we'll talk about it here, kind of break it down, simplify it. Long-term cellular communication is performed by the endocrine system and is performed by chemical messengers called hormones, distributed by the secretory system to all the target cells. And target cells can be anywhere in the body. A single hormone can alter the metabolic activities of multiple tissues. All right, so we're going to go to white screen here for a second. So if you think about the central nervous system and essentially the brain, and about right here is a major endocrine organ, and we're going to talk about it, the pituitary gland. It has two parts, anterior and posterior. And what this gland does is it has the ability to control multiple areas, including the heart, the liver, pancreas, multiple areas at one time. These are the kidneys. Sorry about the drawing here. The adrenaline glands on top of them. So how do I control all of these systems at once? And the answer is if I kick out a hormone that goes into the circulatory system from the brain, this hormone cascades down and it has receptor sites on multiple organs. And from that, those receptor sites then respond. Example of this, adrenocorticotropic hormones, steroids, and adrenaline from the adrenal glands on the kidneys. Alpha, beta, and delta cells. Alpha cells secreting glucagon. Glucagon goes to the liver, breaks apart glycogen. Glycogen makes sugar available. Beta cells secreting insulin. Insulin has the ability to allow glucose into the cell. ADH from the posterior pituitary, no more peeing hormone, makes more fluid volume available, retains sodium, renin-angiotensin system. All of these interact with multiple organ systems at once. The cascade, it kind of works like a domino effect. If you have one domino and then, one domino and then 2, 4, 8. So every time that we cascade one, it excites 2 more and 2 more and then 2 more. And what we get is multiple organ systems and multiple targets reacting at one time. So when we're talking about chemical messengers, that is the hormones. An example of a hormone, adrenaline or epinephrine is considered a hormone, and these are going to go to target cells all over the body and pretty much tell them what to do or give them a specific type of chemical communication. Both systems rely on the release of chemicals that bind to specific receptor sites on target cells. Both systems share various chemical messengers. Examples of these are going to be epinephrine and norepinephrine, and this would be from the adrenaline gland. Both systems primarily regulated by negative feedback systems. A positive feedback system reinforces the effect. A negative feedback system says, okay, levels are high enough, please stop what you were doing. Both systems coordinate and regulate the activities of other cells, tissues, organs, and systems, and maintain homeostasis. And if we want to think about homeostasis as balance, that would be a good thought process to have. Example, we lose fluid and we become hypovolemic. Heart rate increases, vascular constriction occurs, and this is to maintain the blood pressure to the cellular environment. So homeostasis is maintained, or balance is maintained. 1.3, an overview of the endocrine system. Endocrine cells are glands and secretory cells that release their secretions into the extracellular fluids. Hormones are chemical messengers that are released in one tissue and transported by the bloodstream to reach target cells in their other tissues. Example of this. Let's say let's use one that has a positive feedback system. So posterior pituitary, the back half of the pituitary secretes oxytocin. And oxytocin or pitocin does one thing. It pretty much increases contraction. And this is a positive feedback. So when oxytocin is released and contractions are occurring, it gives a signal to increase contractile force strength. And then that signal then excites more oxytocin, which is going to increase it even more and more. So this is a positive feedback. The hormone adds to the stimulus and will keep adding to the stimulus until the child is born. Versus a negative feedback system. Let's say your blood pressure is low, and again the posterior pituitary releases antidiuretic hormone. The antidiuretic hormone would cause you to stop peeing or stop moving fluid out and retain fluid. What this is going to do is increase the blood pressure. This is a negative feedback system, and now the signal is stopped. So these are multiple endocrine glands over the body. Hypothalamus produces ADH, oxytocin, and regulatory hormones. Pituitary gland, you have essentially two parts to it, the anterior and the posterior pituitary. Now, there are 9 hormones that are released by the pituitary gland. So this is like the super controlling hormone or the master gland. In these 9 hormones, 2 of them are released from the posterior pituitary, and this would be good to know, oxytocin and ADH. The rest of them are released by the anterior pituitary. So whenever you see these in test questions and it asks you, oxytocin is released by which part of the pituitary gland, the anterior or the posterior? Well, the answer is going to be the posterior. ADH is released by the anterior or the posterior. The answer is going to be the posterior. Thyroid stimulating hormone, anterior or posterior? The answer would be anterior. The only 2 hormones that are released by the posterior pituitary are going to be oxytocin and ADH. Thyroid gland pretty much controls cellular metabolism throughout the body, T3, T4, and calcitonin. Thymus and thymosins, they adjust the way that the T cells operate from the immune system. So if the lymphocyte comes into contact with thymosins, it gets altered and matured into what we consider a T cell. And then we have the adrenaline glands. Adrenaline glands obviously have adrenaline, which is epi and norepi, and they also have corticosteroids, aldosterone, androgens, steroids. Pardon me. Pineal gland, melatonin, sleep cycles. Parathyroid glands, also the opposite control of calcium. The heart responds to 2, and we'll talk about this more in chapter 12, which is atrial natriuretic peptide. Kidneys respond to renin, EPO or erythropoietin, and calciutrol. Chapters 11 and 18 we'll talk more about calciutrol and how the kidneys function. EPO excites, we'll also talk about that in chapter 11. EPO excites the production of red blood cells. Adipose tissue, leptin, and resistin. This adjusts the way we metabolize fat. Digestive tract, numerous amounts of hormones are released here. Chapter 16 is when we're going to talk about that. Pancreatic islets, insulin and glucagon. They missed one here, which is somatostatin. Have 3 cells in the islets of Langerhans in your pancreas. You have alpha, beta, and delta. Alpha cells secrete glucagon. Beta cells secrete insulin. Delta cells secrete somatostatin. Glucagon breaks apart glycogen stores in the liver, so it makes sugar available. Insulin allows the sugar into the cell, and then whenever we have enough sugar for the cell, or glucose for the cell, somatostatin is released and puts the stop on the production of new sugar. Structure of hormones. There are amino acid derivatives as far as hormones go, small molecular structure similar to amino acids, and examples of these are going to be epinephrine, norepinephrine, thyroid hormone, and melatonin. And then we have peptide hormones, chains of amino acids, and examples of these are going to be ADH, oxytocin, growth hormone, prolactin, includes all the hormones secreted by the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, heart, kidneys, thymus, digestive tract, and pancreas. All of those are peptide hormones or protein chains. We have lipid derivatives, and there are 2 classes of lipid-based hormones. There are steroid hormones, and those will come from the adrenaline glands, and eicosanoids. Steroid hormones are lipids that are derived from cholesterol based by the reproductive organs and the adrenaline glands. Prostaglandins, which are eicosanoids, coordinate local cellular activities and affect enzymatic process in the extracellular fluid. This includes blood clotting. Prostaglandins are seen in inflammation chain, so any kind of Tylenol or NSAID is going to adjust how prostaglandins are formed. The mechanism of hormonal action. Hormones alter cellular operations by changing the identities, activities, locations, or quantities of important enzymes. An enzyme works by, it's kind of like free money, so we use a lot of enzymatic actions in the body because they don't require any energy. You have part A and part B, and as long as you have the enzyme for it, then part C can be created from those. You have target cells. A target cell is the end result of a hormonal action. So example of this, epinephrine responds to 4 target cells, and the target cells that it responds to is alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1, and beta 2. Now, whenever we release epinephrine, all of these are in various locations throughout the body. Alpha is primarily in the vasculature, and beta is pretty much in the muscles. So whenever you have a release of the epinephrine or adrenaline hormone, you're going to get a cascade of the body hitting all of these receptor sites at the same time. So the vessels are going to constrict. The heart, which is beta 1, that's the receptor site that makes the heart beat harder, faster, and stronger. And beta 2 are the smooth muscles of the actual bronchial tubes, which will dilate. Albuterol is a beta 2 agonist or a beta 2 stimulant in case someone's having an asthma attack. Dobutamine is a strict beta inotropic stimulant. We give epinephrine in asthmatics for its beta 2 response. So we hit these target cells all the time in EMS and in emergency medicine. So figure 10.2 in your book, target cell receptors. So the endocrine cell releases the actual hormone. Hormone travels throughout the body, and then it won't actually bind to the neural tissue. Even though if this was actually inside the CNS, the same hormone might be a neurotransmitter. In this case, it goes through the body until it finds a receptor site. An example is here. And this receptor site will change or alter the way that this muscle interacts with its environment. there's a few more steps to this right here whenever it binds to the outside, and we get a hormone receptor complex, and we'll talk about that here in a few more slides. Hormonal action at the cell. Because epinephrine and norepinephrine and the peptide hormones are not lipid soluble, and very simply lipid soluble means that since we have a phospholipid bilayer, heads and tails, that if it's lipid soluble, it'll go right across. If it's not lipid soluble, it's going to stop at the surface. So because epinephrine and norepinephrine are not, I repeat, are not lipid soluble, they cannot diffuse through a cell membrane. They bind to a receptor on the outside of the cell membrane. And eicosanoids are lipid soluble and diffuse across the cell membrane and bind to receptor proteins on the inner surface. Now, an eicosanoid would travel, or a fat soluble hormone would travel right across the cell membrane and hit its target inside the cell. Hormonal secretion continued. All right, so this is all going to be better in the picture, but I'm going to talk through it here, and then the picture is the next slide. So we have first messengers, and first messengers trigger a secondary messenger in the cytoplasm. So generally our first messengers are on the cell surface. And whenever the hormone hits that, it creates a secondary messenger. Now, a secondary messenger link between the first messenger and the job required may activate or inhibit. So this messenger here may actually stimulate something, or it may put the stop on something. A G protein, an enzyme complex that is coupled to the membrane receptor, and this is how this exterior surface gives the information to the interior of the cell, is through a G protein. All of the adrenaline and the norepinephrine examples that we're going to look at uses something called cyclic adenosine monophosphate, or CAMP. Cyclic AMP is an important secondary messenger that activates kinase enzymes, and enzymatic action then occurs inside the cell, and this enzymatic action inside the cell then brings about the product that the release of the hormone was looking for in the first place. Adenylate cyclase. This is going to be an enzyme that converts ATP to cyclic adenosine monophosphate. And we have another term here called phosphorylation. In addition of the phosphate group to a protein or other organic molecules, phosphorylation activates or deactivates many protein enzymes. We have another term here, cyclic guanosine monophosphate. Is a cyclic nucleotide derived from guanosine triphosphate. Cyclic guanosine monophosphate acts as a secondary messenger, much like cyclic adenosine monophosphate. And then we have GTP here, and this is used as a source of energy for protein synthesis. And let's take a look at the picture here to kind of go over this. All right, so this is a non-steroidal hormone, and this is going to be an example of epinephrine, norepinephrine, peptide hormones, and eicosanoids. So here's our hormone that was released, and it hits the surface of the cell. This is going to activate a G protein, which then activates adenyl cyclase, which will convert ATP into cyclic AMP. This is going to activate another enzyme called kinase, and this is going to alterations in enzyme activity and opens ion channels. So this little kinase maneuver here is what adjusts the surface of the cell and the entire cell into doing whatever the job that this hormone was requesting. And then what we're going to get from that, whenever the cell is doing whatever it was asked to do, is a target cell response. Now, this process is how all of our epinephrine, norepinephrine, and all of our adrenergic or I should say most of our adrenergic or adrenaline type drugs will work in the body. They act like a hormone, they activate a G protein, they get activation of cyclic AMP, and then it adjusts or tells the cell what to do. Hormonal interaction with intracellular receptors. Steroid hormones diffuse rapidly through the lipid portion of the cell membrane and bind to receptors in the cytoplasm. They are made of cholesterol, so these guys right here are fat soluble. The resulting hormone complex then activates or inactivates specific genes in the nucleus. Steroids can alter the messenger RNA transcription, changing structure and function of the cells. Thyroid hormones cross the cell membrane by diffusion or transport. Once in the cell, the hormone receptor complex in the nucleus activates specific genes or changes the rate of messenger RNA. The result is an increase in metabolic rate due to changes in nature and number of enzymes. Hormones bound to mitochondria increase rates of ATP production. So what the thyroid hormones are going to do is essentially increase the metabolic rate of the cellular environment. And an example of this, a steroid hormone could come across the cell and tell the cell a specific message. Example of this, hydrocortisone, Cortef, cortisol will adjust the cell so that it would resensitize it to catecholamines. Now this is something that we're going to see and we're going to talk about in respiratory emergencies, that one of the reasons that we actually use the Solumedrol, one is inflammation, and the other one is that it can do us some assistance to resensitize the patient to the albuterol and adrenergic synthetic hormones that we're trying to elicit on the patient. Thyroid hormones, again, either get transported in through diffusion, will attach to the mitochondria, which increases ATP production. And this is what these things right here adjust metabolism in the body. The secretion and distribution of hormones. Hormone release occurs when capillaries are abundant. Hormones quickly enter the bloodstream for distribution. Hormones in the bloodstream may circulate freely or attach to a special protein. Free hormones are inactivated, and this is important. This is why we don't get free-floating hormones running amok. They diffuse out of the bloodstream. They're absorbed and broken down by the liver or kidneys, and they filter the blood, and they're broken down by enzymes in the plasma or interstitial fluid. So as soon as these guys hit the bloodstream immediately starts breaking them down. Secretion and distribution of hormones. Hormones coordinate cell tissue and organ activities on a sustained basis, circulate in extracellular fluid, and bind to specific receptors on target cells. We release hormone X, it travels in the bloodstream, and then let's say that hormone X's target site was a sinoatrial node. So it hits the sinoatrial node and then gives us specific information on what to do. Then they modify cellular activities by altering membrane permeability, activating or inactivating key enzymes, or changing genetic activity. So this is both the hormone examples, figure 10.3, A and B, hormone action in your book. This is epinephrine and norepinephrine example. G protein activated. This is not fat soluble. Activates adenyl cyclase, ATP to cyclic AMP, kinase activated, alters the activity, opens the ion channels, or gets us our target response. Two hormone examples here. Steroid hormones traveling right across the cell membrane, chemically encode and change the nucleus and the way that the DNA interacts. Thyroid hormones do two things: diffuse across, also changing the DNA or genetics. They'll also attach to the mitochondria, the powerhouse inside the cell, and increase ATP production or metabolism. Clinical notes, endocrine emergencies. Endocrine emergencies are pretty much branched into two categories, and they're branched into categories inadequate hormonal effects and excessive hormonal effects. Example of this, let's say you have pheochromocytoma. Now that's a $5 word for you have a tumor on your adrenaline gland. Now you would not, let's say you're sitting home watching the news and all of a sudden your heart rate increases to about 220 beats per minute and you start breathing at about 40 times per minute. Now this whole symptomology here is not going to have to happen more than probably once or twice before you're going to get that checked out. This would be an example of excessive hormonal effects. The tumor itself can cause erratic distribution of the adrenaline hormone into the bloodstream. Type 1 diabetics. The next example, let me erase some of this. Okay, the other example is going to be inadequate hormonal effects. Type 1 diabetic does not make insulin. That is well inadequate. So their sugar levels can be very, very, very high. The reason they're high is the beta cells that secrete insulin are either worn out or they've been infected with a virus. And these cells are located in the pancreas, or the islets of Langerhans in the pancreas. The insulin allows sugar into the cell. So without insulin present, the sugar can't make it into the cell. So then the sugar resides outside of the cell in the extracellular environment. What this does is this causes a rise in blood sugar levels. That's why they have blood sugar levels whenever they're first discovered of 400 or 500. Normal blood sugar should be somewhere under 120, but above 60. All right, endocrine disorders, there are a bunch of them. We're going to talk about some of these, diabetes being one of them, Addison's, Cushing's, hyper and hypothyroidism. These things do a lot. Addison's, diabetes, Cushing's disease can jack up glucose metabolism, which have a primary effect on metabolism. They also can jack up fluid and electrolyte balance, if you'll notice. Diabetes insipidus is something completely different. You would think it'd have something to do with sugar, but actually diabetes insipidus is ADH based. Pituitary and dwarfism, because growth hormone comes from there. Gigantism, from flipping it the other way. Addison's disease, effects on the cardiovascular system. Pheochromocytoma, tumor on the adrenaline gland. Hyperthyroidism. We'll talk about a few of these, and others we'll talk about as we actually hit the chapters. But there are several endocrine disorders, and any of these can be either an overabundance or not enough of the hormone. The control of the endocrine activity. Endocrine activity, specifically hormonal secretion, is controlled by a negative feedback mechanism, and that means it's going to provide the opposite effect. Example of this, blood pressure is low. We're going to increase cardiac output and squeeze down the vessels, and that's until the blood pressure becomes adequate. At the point that the blood pressure becomes adequate, then we're going to draw back on that. We won't keep it running, the heart rate running, continuously at very, very high levels. As soon as we can correct homeostasis, that's the negative feedback. Another example, I'm cold, body sends information to make me start shivering to increase my body core temperature. Body core temperature increases, I stop shivering. Endocrine activity may be controlled by three mechanisms. Humoral stimuli, changes in the composition of extracellular fluid. Hormonal stimuli, changes in the levels of stimulating hormones. And then neural stimulation, arrival of a hormone at a neuroglandular junction. So this would be where the central nervous system is communicating directly with the actual endocrine organ. Hypothalamus and endocrine regulation. The hypothalamus secretes regulatory hormones, which are special and control the activity of the endocrine cells in the anterior pituitary gland. And we can do this by a couple different ways. We have releasing hormones, which stimulating the production of one or more hormones in the anterior pituitary. And we have inhibiting hormones, and these would prevent the synthesis and secretion of pituitary hormones. The hypothalamus acts as an endocrine organ by synthesizing two hormones, ADH and oxytocin. The hypothalamus contains autonomic nervous system centers that control the endocrine cells on the adrenal medulla through sympathetic innervation. When the sympathetic division is activated, the adrenal medulla releases the hormones. Now, the target cells are throughout the body in multiple locations. That's why we can come along and give a person a loading dose of epinephrine and get the same results. We have a synthetic version of that hormone. So this is hypothalamic control. Again, posteriors into two parts, anterior, posterior. So production of ADH is released, and this is going to get into the hypophyseal system, go out to the body, release of ADH and oxytocin. And what this is going to cause in the adrenaline gland is a secretion of epinephrine and norepinephrine. Now, what this is going to do simultaneously, as you get the anti-peen, antidiuretic hormone released, your heart rate's going to increase from the epinephrine, and you're going to get an alpha response or a vascular constriction simultaneously. The pituitary gland 2.0. You have the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary. We're going to talk about vasopressin and diabetes insipidus. The pituitary gland, or hypophysis, secretes 9 different hormones. All are peptide or small proteins. All use cyclic AMP as a secondary messenger, and has 2 distinct tissues. We have tissue in the anterior section, and we have tissue that is different in the posterior section. And this is the hypothalamus, and this is the pituitary gland here. Remember that the posterior pituitary secretes 2 hormones. That would be oxytocin and ADH. This is a real picture of it here. The anterior pituitary gland contains endocrine cells surrounded by a capillary network. And the capillary network, we're going to come into this also in the liver, part of the hypophyseal portal system. And I need to define a portal system here really quick. A portal system, a portal venous system occurs when a capillary bed drains into another capillary bed through veins without first going through the heart. So we essentially have a direct access to the circulatory system through a portal circulatory. Now, we're also going to see this in the liver, and what's considered the portal, if someone is ever termed as having portal hypertension, they generally have portal hypertension because of a fatty liver. Now, the fatty liver is generally cirrhotic, and it will cause backup pressure that will cause ascites to occur in the abdomen sometimes. And we'll talk about this more whenever we hit the liver or digestive system. And this is a picture 10.7 of the hypophyseal portal system. If you'll think of a portal system or the hypophyseal system as an easy way to get these hormones into the circulating environment. They'll go out on the arterial side, and they'll essentially, once they're secreted into the hypophyseal portal system, they essentially will go to the areas that they need to or get circulated at that point. Hypothalamic control of the anterior pituitary. An endocrine cell in the anterior pituitary may be controlled by releasing hormones, inhibitory hormones, or a combination of the two. The rate of hormone secretion by the hypothalamus is regulated through a negative feedback system. And a negative feedback system is simply this. The stimulus was given, and whenever we have reached homeostasis or reached to a certain point, the negative feedback system is please stop this activity. And these are 10.8 endocrine secretions, and I would look through these a couple times. There's quite a few test questions in this block over this. Example, releasing hormone, anterior pituitary hormone 1, endocrine gland spits out hormone 2, and then you get a product in your target cells. The negative feedback system is once this has done and it maintains homeostasis, is it will give feedback. So examples here, releasing hormone, thyroid releasing hormone, chronotropic releasing hormone. Example, thyroid releasing hormone releases thyroid stimulating hormone, which affects the thyroid gland, which now releases thyroid hormones. Corticotropic releasing hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, here, adrenal cortex, and then releases glucocorticoids. We're going to see that a releasing hormone was initiated. The hormone then, from the pituitary, gets the control that it needs, or the spit out of the secondary hormone. That hormone is going to affect an organ, and then that organ is going to release more hormones. So what we get here is we get, again, like I said before, a cascade, one to another to another. Hormones of the anterior pituitary. Thyroid stimulating hormone releases in response to thyrotropin, releasing hormone from the hypothalamus, and an increase in thyroid hormones is what it brings about. And you have adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH, and this stimulates the release of steroid hormones by the adrenal cortex, and this is the adrenaline gland. Specifically targets glucocorticoids, which affects glucose metabolism. Release occurs under stimulation of corticotropin releasing hormone, corticotropin releasing hormone. A rise in glucocorticoid levels causes a decline in the production of ACTH and CHR. So this is the negative feedback system here. Corticotropic releasing hormone, you get a rise in glucocorticoids, and then the levels cause a decline in what kicked them off to begin with. Gonadotropins regulates the activities of male and female sex organs, or gonads, stimulated by gonadotropin releasing hormone. Follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, promotes follicle development in females, and it stimulates the secretion of estrogen. Luteinizing hormone induces ovulation, production of reproduction cells in females. Prolactin works on other hormones to stimulate mammary gland development. Gonadotropins continued, we get growth hormone out of them as well, stimulates cell growth and replication by accelerating the rate of protein synthesis. The indirect action, liver cells respond to growth hormone by sensitizing somatomedin, insulin-like growth factors. Somatomedins increase the rate in which amino acids are taken up. And the melanocyte is a stimulating hormone in the body. So again, there's figure 10.8, endocrine secretions. If you'll just remember, one hormone brings about others, which those organs then release their endocrine hormones, which affect multiple cellular environments throughout the body. Posterior pituitary gland contains axons from two different groups of neurons located within the hypothalamus. One group manufactures ADH and the other one oxytocin. ADH, or antidiuretic hormone, released as a response to stimuli as increased osmotic pressure or fall in blood volume. So if we have a fall in blood volume, the ADH is released, and ADH is antidiuretic hormone, which means anti-peeing hormone, which would bring back some of the blood volume or your fluid volume back into the body. Oxytocin stimulates smooth muscle contractions in the wall of the uterus during labor and in special contractile cells in the mammary glands. Oxytocin or Pitocin. Summary of the posterior pituitary gland. So this is everything that we just get through talking about. Quick overview of it. Hypothalamus regulates the activities of the anterior pituitary, which produces 7 hormones. Most control other endocrine organs, which are outside the body. Examples of these are going to be the thyroid, adrenal glands, the gonads. Produces growth hormone, stimulates cell growth and protein synthesis. Posterior pituitary releases 2 hormones, which are ADH and oxytocin. Antidiuretic hormone restricts water loss and promotes thirst. Oxytocin stimulates smooth muscle contractions in the uterus and mammary glands in the female and the prostate in the male. And these are the pituitary hormones and their targets. Examples of this: ADH is going to be the kidneys, oxytocin, smooth muscle, the prostate, which is here in the male, and then the uterine in the female. Unknown on this one. Melanocyte stimulating hormone. Luteinizing hormone pretty much affects sexual organs. Follicle stimulating hormone, sexual organs in both male and female, testosterone and estrogen, whichever one you have. Prolactate, mammary glands, growth hormone, liver, somatomedians, bone and muscle and other tissues, thyroid stimulating hormone, thyroid hormones, T3, T4, which affect all cells. This is like a global thing. Adrenocorticotropic hormone, adrenal cortex, epinephrine and norepinephrine, directly from the nervous system through sympathetic stimulus, fight or flight, and then glucocorticoids, cortisol, corticosterones are excreted through interaction with the glucocorticoids. Clinical notes here: vasopressin, and this is a synthetic version of ADH, decreases the amount of water loss through the kidneys, causes constriction of peripheral vasoconstriction, increases blood volume. When given in high doses, vasoconstriction properties are enhanced, acts like an alpha agonist hormone, and alters cellular response. Now, we give this as a single dose in full arrest, and this is an alternate to epinephrine. So whenever you have someone in a systole, PEA, VFib, VTAC pulseless, you can give one dose that is 40 units, one-time dose in a full arrest, and that's only in the first 10 minutes of the arrest. After that, we're going to supplement the patient with epinephrine. Clinical note: this is going to be diabetes insipidus. And diabetes insipidus, let's go ahead and, without looking at the poly here really quick, this is caused from a posterior pituitary no longer releasing adequate amounts of antidiuretic hormone. So you have no anti-peen hormone in the body. And what this is going to cause is this is going to cause polyuria, which is pretty much multiple or many peen, is what that means, many urination. Water conservation at the kidneys is impaired. Excessive amounts of water are lost in the urine. Patients are constantly thirsty, and this is called polydipsia. And pretty much, unless this is corrected, fatal dehydration can pretty much occur from this. This is called diabetes insipidus. And this is the end of part 1. If you have any questions, feel free to call me. My number is 405-219-7613, and you can email me at smithr@emsa.net. Thank you.